Have you ever gone to a restaurant and ordered a crab for dinner? It arrives at the table looking bright and beautiful, but it only takes a few moments before you realize that cracking through that tough shell isn't worth the amount of meat that you find inside. Godfall is a crab. When it first lands on your plate, it looks shiny and vibrant, but it only takes a few moments before you realize the amount of work it takes to like this game just isn't worth the effort. And at the end, you're left tired, frustrated, and worst of all, still hungry. Before we get started, I just want to say welcome to the Ginger Gaming Guy. My name is Steven. I'm a ginger, I'm a gamer, and I'm a guy, which makes me qualified to run this little YouTube channel. And when I say little, I mean it. We're brand new here. So if you like this video, do us a favor and give it a like. Or maybe even subscribe and become a founding member of the gaming community that we're trying to build here. And if you didn't like this video, well, I'm just going to label you as a ginger hater. And despite what you've heard, some of us do have souls. I know. I check my soul every day just to make sure that it hasn't realized that I'm a ginger and somehow left. No, but seriously, if you didn't like this video, give us a thumbs down, but leave us a comment below telling us what you didn't like about it. That way, next time, we can do better. And just so you know, our scale for rating games is pass, buy, or get from Gamefly. Gamefly can also mean Xbox Game Pass because, let's face it, almost everything is coming to Game Pass. Alright, enough jabber, let's see where God falls on this scale. So what is Godfall? Godfall is a looter slasher that has a heavy emphasis on melee combat. And combat is how you'll be spending the majority of your time in this world. And let me say just one thing about the combat. My God, does it fall short. Godfall's biggest problem with combat is the lack of input or animation canceling, which is the ability to cancel one movement in favor of another movement. Say you're in the middle of an attack and you realize you need to dodge. You hit the dodge button and the game cancels the attack in favor of the dodge because it's the last button you hit. Godfall doesn't have this, which literally blows my mind since Godfall's combat system is based around pulling off light and heavy combos. You're constantly spamming attacks you can't get out of if you need to block or dodge. And once you realize this, you don't even bother trying to block or dodge, because it's based off of guessing when the enemy will actually attack. Instead, it's much easier to stand there toe-to-toe with the enemy, swinging light and heavy attacks, trading blow after blow just to see who dies first. There is no skill involved in Godfall's combat. And I know what you're thinking. This probably works one-on-one, but you can't do this for a group of enemies, right? Wrong. Because most of the grunts are more than happy to let you just stand there, beating them, while their friends watch. And even when you do get hit, it doesn't matter much, because most enemies drop health when they die, so you're constantly plowing your way through them, refilling your health as you go. Even the bosses, which are harder, have health checkpoints. Health checkpoints. It's as if the developers knew that you wouldn't bother blocking. Which means that the only required skill to be good at Godfall is patience. You just wait them out, slowly knocking their health away piece by piece. Another problem with Godfall here is the camera. The camera is breathing down your neck more than your grade in at Christmas dinner. You know the one I'm talking about. The one that wants you to rub her bunions for a quarter and doesn't realize that you're a grown man that now knows the value of money. Well, sorry about that. But anyway, because the camera's up your metal line's butt most of the time, you don't get a good sense of your surroundings. You don't get a good sense of where attacks are coming from. Let me break it down for you. A typical encounter in Godfall went something like this. Rush in, do a couple of attacks, then start slide spinning around like a ballerina with narcolepsy until you get a good view of all your enemies. Then walk to each enemy one by one, doing light and heavy attacks until they were dead. And you're doing this whether you're fighting bosses or grunts. It's the entire game, hour after hour. It's all the meat that Godfall has to offer its players. To make matters worse is the game's AI, which is average at the best of times. There were tons of times where enemies just stood there, looking at me as I slowly whittled away their health. Sometimes objectives wouldn't complete, and then I'd have to run around, and eventually I would find some enemy off in the distance somewhere just staring at me, not noticing that I just ripped through 10 of his buddies. But one of the most disappointing parts of Godfall's combat is the sense of weight. Well, the lack of the sense of weight. Take, for example, your shield throw, which slams into enemies, sending them flying back and allows you to pull off a finisher. This should be one of the best moves in the game. Instead, it doesn't feel good. It actually feels like nothing, like you throw your shield through paper. And that's not just for your shield, that's for every weapon in the game. None of them really feel good to use because you don't get a sense of contact with the enemy. Apart from the heavy hammers, which have a good sense of weight when you're swinging them rather than when you hit the enemy. And this is because it utilizes the PlayStation 5's haptic feedback. Melee weapons in games like God of War are legendary because they feel good to use. There's a sense of connecting with the enemy, there's a weight behind each throw, each swing of Kratos' axe. Godfall doesn't have any of that weight to its combat. And to be honest, while the combat looks cool, it is some of the dullest combat I've experienced in a long time. I'm not joking when I say that in some battles, I'd spam the button so much that my mind would kind of drift off and I'd catch myself thinking about the things I needed to do that day, like groceries and laundry lists. I would literally be daydreaming about buying groceries while playing this game. That's how dull the combat is. The combat does work. I didn't really have any lag or any major frame rate issues, but while the combat is functional, it isn't fun, which is the most important thing for a game to get right. The combat does have a few good ideas. There's a breach system, which is basically a stagger gauge that once you do enough armor damage, you stun an enemy. There's a soul shatter system that lets you bank damage in an enemy's health bar, and in order to actually do that damage, you have to pull off a heavy attack. And the polarity system, which stores energy in the weapon you're not using. Once that energy is full, you can switch weapons mid-combat and get a damage boost for 30 seconds. The problem is that none of these systems feel fleshed out. I think the devs would have served the game better by getting rid of two and just focusing on one. Or maybe they should have tied the systems to class. One class could do polarity damage, another class could do the stagger damage, and another could do the soul shatter damage. Because they all work, and if they were fleshed out with their own skill trees, they would be awesome. Godfall here doesn't even do a good job of explaining how these systems work. The only information you get is a few info screens in the tutorial level. And speaking of characters and different classes, in Godfall, there are none. Well, I guess technically there are. They're there. You can choose them. There's just no difference between them. Every different character uses the same weapons, has similar stats, and even shares the same skill tree. Now, I get that you're playing the same character and you're essentially just switching armor here, but there should be some difference. In fact, the only difference is the ultimate Archon ability is what it's called. But the problem is that they're not good. Many of them are just minor stat buffs that have little to no major impact. So basically, you're unlocking them, copying over all your gear, and then continuing the grind. The game even has a button to let you copy over all your gear. Now, I'm sure the devs did this with the best intentions to make it easier, but really it just shows how generic these things are. The end result is that there's no characters, no classes, and no reason to switch skins, otherwise personal preference. And personally, I don't think it's worth the time or effort required to unlock these different skins. I mean, who wants to grind for 2 hours to unlock a skin that looks like an armored stink bug? Speaking of resources, let's move on to gameplay and level design. And let me tell you, it ain't better. Godfall is built around one thing: collecting resources. You have to collect resources to do anything in this game. You have to collect resources to unlock new levels, armor, upgrades, and character skins. You collect these resources by grinding the same levels over and over again. And this goes for upgrading your weapons as well. There's orbs for everything in this game. And speaking of upgrading weapons, there's no point to it. Because while you can't upgrade your weapons, enemies drop so many weapons that there's a good chance by the end of the next level you'll have something better. So why take the risk of spending your electro nodes that you just spent an hour grinding for when you can just pick up something in 10 minutes? Even unlocking new worlds is a massive grind. Say you want to go from the Earth realm to the Water realm. That requires you to go through all the stages in the Earth realm to unlock the door to the boss. But to open the door to the boss, you have to have so many Earth sigils. And to get these sigils, to get enough to go to the next realm, you have to go back through the levels you just beat to gather more Earth sigils. It's just an endless loop. And many of these levels are just kill the boss again. And for some reason, they give you like a 40-minute time limit, but you usually spawn right next to, if not really close to the boss, that takes like 3 minutes to beat. And so you have 40 minutes for some reason. And then they ask you if you want to run around in spirit mode looking for chests or lighting beacons. I just don't understand the point. Even after you get enough tokens and you go through the door and you beat the boss, the game forces you to do one more grind before you go to a new level. And after you beat the boss, you have to run down this long hallway to a tower. Inside the tower, you get on an elevator that starts going up. We're going to the Water realm. I don't know why we're going up a tower. On the elevator, a group of enemies spawn. You kill them. The elevator stops, forces you off to guess what? Kill more enemies. And that's not it. The process repeats itself again before you get to the Water realm. And finally you get to the Water realm, and guess what the game does? It tells you that the level's over, forces you to load back to the mission hub to start a new mission that then loads you right where you just left. Even the way you get missions is broken. You get missions from this broken face thing that looks like something the Blue Man Group would worship. And sometimes her missions are walk across the room. Literally walk across the room and talk to the only other NPC in the game. And then you talk to that NPC and they give you a mission to walk back across the room where you just came from and talk to the blue glowy face thing again.
Yes, where's Greaves?
What is this game? And that example pretty much perfectly summed up Godfall, doing the same thing over and over again, whether it comes to battles or missions. It doesn't matter. It's just rinse and repeat. This entire game is just rinse and repeat. There's nothing here. There's no meat. And that brings us to story, because a lot of these issues could be overlooked if there was an engaging story that was keeping you involved. And if you're one of those people that thrive off a rich story in a lush fantasy setting, well, Godfall's not the game for you.
How so?
He's wrong about the rites of ascension. They won't turn him into a god after all.
Why not?
It's a sacrifice ritual. He's a dead man. He's playing with fire. We have to stop him before he wreaks more havoc on this world.
The story of Godfall is one of betrayal and revenge. Your brother betrays you because he wants to become a god, and he throws you out of the palace, and then you start the game and you run into the palace where he's at, and he's the person you want to stop, but for some reason you leave the palace because we have to defeat his generals before we can kill him, even though we were already in the palace where he's at. I don't know what's going on here. And that's because the only story beats you get are in the opening cutscene, which lasts 3 to 4 minutes.
But he turned us against each other.
Now, I do want to come clean and say that I didn't finish this game. I made it about 80% of the way through, and I just could not bring myself to finish the last few battles. I couldn't justify spending any more time playing Godfall. Which is a shame because this is one game I was really
despite
looking
all the
forward to.
maneuvers
I like
and
the
all
art
the
style.
strategy,
I thought the graphics were
in the
pretty
end,
good, although there are
was
a little too many particle effects for me, but I think that's personal preference. The environments are beautiful at first, but then it's kind of just copy and paste the same thing over and over again. Some of the environments are overdone, like the palace level, which looks like smog threw up everywhere. I thought the combat looked engaging, which we now know it isn't. Overall, Godfall's just a massive disappointment, which sucks. What's even more disappointing is that all the building blocks of a good game are there. They're just flawed in so many ways that it adds up to a crappy game.
these people were our
In
allies
fact,
once.
many of these things you might not even notice if you started playing Godfall.
Most
It
are
just
wrong
wouldn't feel
themselves.
right. It wouldn't feel exciting or fun. And then once you started digging into it, you'd realize how flawed this game is. It's god awful. Alright, guys, should you pass, buy, or get from Gamefly? If you've made it this far, then you probably know that buying is right out the window. And to be honest, so is Gamefly. I wouldn't waste my time on this game. I think there's a good chance it will be a PlayStation Plus game sometime in the near future, and I wouldn't even waste a Gamefly rental on it, especially in 2020 when we have so many good things to play. My backlog is insane. So yeah, Godfall, hard pass. If it becomes free somewhere, give it a chance, install it, play a couple hours. My guess is you'll quickly uninstall it. Alright guys, that wraps up this Godfall review. On deck we have Spider-Man Miles Morales, the PlayStation 5 version. I'm finishing my second playthrough of that game today. I'll have a lot of thoughts on how it compares to Spider-Man 2018, the graphics, ray tracing, all the good stuff. Until then, give this video a like, which earns you 10 good karma points. Or subscribe. If you subscribe, a ginger somewhere sprouts an extra freckle. It's crazy. Even if you don't subscribe, have a great day. Do something nice for a ginger or a blonde or a brunette, anybody with hair. Or without hair. Some people don't have hair. Do something nice for somebody today.